Even though it's not spring, in fact, we have snow falling today, a couple inches of new snow, my plants have decided that it is spring for them and they want to grow. Venus flytraps are putting out new growth, and even though they look very tiny, in a couple of months they're going to be out around there. The SARs are putting out new growth, and I've got some purpurea that are growing, but I've got a lot of dead in here that I need to trim away. So I'm going to take today and I'm going to clean things up, kind of renew my bog mix and clean up this bog garden, and I'll show you the steps that I take to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here. I'm going to add in some new perlite, new peat, some perlite, and this is called turfus, which is what they use on the baseball diamond. It's a surface material. These are going to help with loosening the soil up. This is very tight in here right now, and I want to make it looser, and add in some fresh peat to make everything a little bit more spring ready to grow, and see if I can improve this. Normally what I would do would be to mix these wet, and I normally would dump it into this container where I can shake it around and have good mix in here. But because the perlite is so dusty, I'm just going to do a loose mix in here and get this ready to go, so when I start pulling out some of the plants from the pot, I can then just add in and blend in this into the bog. So let me get that done first, and then we'll start. All right, so I did go back to my little container and do my mix in there. It's just easier for me. Also, I did water it. It's so dusty on that perlite that it's actually a hazard. So normally I wear my mask and water things down, so that's what I did today. And I have this a very, very loose mix because I'm going to be adding in to this, not replacing it. I'm just kind of making it a loose mix so that when it's added in, it will buffer out to about the right consistency. So now that I've got my mix ready to go, it's time to pull out some plants. And what's getting me most of my attention is the SARs are looking, well, they're looking pretty bad. But that is because it is the end of dormancy for them. They have sat around for the entire winter from November until now. It's end of February, almost March. And so there's a lot of dead in here. And I want to get rid of that. And also, you can see the miners have taken over, and I need to thin that out tremendously. So let me get started on that. So what is my bog garden? Well, my bog has a pot that is, where did my tape measure go? Who stole my tape measure? There it is. When they hide well. My bog is about 17 inches across and about 8 inches deep. So I've got some good room for root growth on there, and I have a large enough area where I can get some good plants in there. But for me, in my growing condition, this is still light enough where I can take it in the house and get it out of the 20-degree below zero temperatures that we've had this year. My top is a standard bog mix, or a peat perlite mix for most CPs. Then I have a layer of sphagnum moss down in here. And then I have at the bottom of it, I have layer of perlite. And the perlite gives me less weight. If I fill this up with just the peat, perlite, sand mix like any other bog or CP mix, it's going to be real heavy. And right now, this thing is a definite weight to it. So lighten it up a little bit with the perlite. In the middle, I have a pot. I can generally water from here and know how much water I've got, or I can stick a Gatorade bottle, which fits fine in here, put that upside down, and the water will automatically fill. So that's the basis of the bog itself. Now, I pulled out my first plant, and you can see I've got growth on here through the sphagnum moss layer. And that's fine. It can go down into that 8 inches of depth there. And the plant itself, obviously doing quite well. I've got good growth on this all the way around. My roots look really good. So I'm going to take and clean this up a little bit. And I will be back and show you more of how I'm going to put this whole thing together. A little bit on this particular batch of sard. I don't know what this Sarracenia is. I don't know the name of this one, but let me show you something here if I can. Right there is a flower. That is the bud for a flower. That will obviously get quite tall. But a lot of this is dead, so I'm going to trim this down. If it is brown, trim it down. If it's green, it's going to aid for the plant growth. So I am going to trim much of this off and then clean up my mess later. You too. So that looks a lot better. It's got much better growth area in here. There's some weeds and stuff I'm going to get out of your moss. But this has got also good roots on it. It is going to grow up well. And this one I'm going to put back in after I clean up a little bit more of the root system. And because I'm going to reduce the number of plants in my bog, I have taken out one of my aggressive minors and just thrown that into a pot. I haven't done anything to it yet. That will come later. But that gets that one out of there. I want to have my larger growth in the back and the Venus flytraps, the smaller ones in the front, and the Sarracenia minors were just way too much in there. So I'm going to have one of those, one of my scarlet bells, a couple of these, and I don't know if these are lukes or what they are, but less in here. So let me continue working on this and I'll be back. Well, I think cleanup went pretty well. I have got a nice little 2-batch here. And I do have a bud on this one. And I have my perps cleaned up. A little bit of dead yet, but overall pretty good. Let me move that a little bit over there. And again, I got some good growth points on here. This will do well. There's at least 3 divisions on that. And this one fell over here. This is also looking pretty good. Now these are a little bit slower growth, little slower growing than some of the other plants. So I'm going to keep these in fairly tight shape here. And another one of those, whatever those are. One minor that I'm going to put back in. Cleaned it up pretty well. And as I was cleaning, the brown is what I cut off. Like this piece here, I should be cutting off. But I opened one up just to see how well we're doing here. And as you can see, it's had a good year. And that's what is dying, is the brown has got so much of the insects in it that it has had its fill and is done. But it did really well. I'm real happy with my plants from last year, the way they filled out and how well that they've taken care of themselves. And the last one I've got for my SARS is the Scarlet Bell, and I've cleaned off a lot of this stuff. Scarlet Bell isn't, in my opinion, isn't a big eater, but I do see that on this one here there is some dark from insect decay there. So now the next thing is I've leveled out my media in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, now again, I'm looking at this as this is the front, this is the back. So I'm going to kind of plant this backwards. I want my big plant in the back. So I'm going to plop this in. Now, because I'm going to add in more material, I'm going to raise this a little bit. I'm going to be very close to level on this. So I'm just going to plop these in and take a look and see if there's adjustments I need to do, and then I'll start on the fly traps. So I've spent some time getting the new, or the cleaned up plants back in place. I've added in my looser mix, and I say looser because if I try to squeeze this, it falls apart. It's not going to bind and block the roots. So I should get good growth out of this. Now I get dirty hands. So now I will do some additional firming and make sure everything is in place the way I want. I may have to move that one just a little bit further over. I'm going to then top up with just a peat mix to kind of hide some of the perlite. Perlite's not the best looking thing to have out on top, but the peat will hide that and bring me up to my final level. And I think this is going to look good come spring. But I still have this much that is fly traps, and they need to be cleaned up some too. So let's get started with fly traps. Using my tiny little shovel, I'm just going to dig in around the fly trap and pull out as much as I can with the dirt, the media, and everything else. You can see there's a lot of tiny little traps on this thing. Now, as I loosen the media around it, what I'm looking for, and people say, well, when should I replant my fly traps? For me, I like doing it in the spring. And spring is when they've got smaller growth on there, so you're not disturbing a lot of the plant. Always have to wait for the clock to stop. And then you can also see, if I get this to the camera right, this is the rhizome. That is the part that grows your new traps. Each one of these little leaflets come from in there. And if I was to look further here, I've got 1, 2, 3. Oops. Hate to say oops. Oop, there's a little one. There's one. And there's a bigger one. So that little clump had 4 plants in it. Maybe even more. Yeah, see, there's 2 there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little plants that that can be replanted. Those are all good growth plants. But how many do I need in this thing? These are all typicals. I don't have anything in here that is a named cultivar. These are just plain old fly traps. And what I'm going to do when I put these back in is I'm going to try to disturb the roots as little as possible. And I'm going to take some wet sphagnum moss, clean out some of the stuff I don't want, and I'm just going to kind of wrap this in here. And I'm going to plant that. So I'm going to pull the rest of these out, and this is how I will be planting. Some of the little ones I think I will repot into separate pots, and so I've got those for later, but for now I'm going to pull these out and I'll show you as I get to a planting point. Alright, so I'm going to take this larger clump here and show you what I do for cleanup. First off, you see that there's the dead. Well, we don't need that. That can go away. I'm not going to worry about the trap itself that is not looking very good. They still have green, and green is more important than anything else. The trap does not need to eat in order to live, but it does need to have green. And so you can see this has got some beautiful rhizome on it. And there's some that's growing up into here, and this is growing here. So if I just kind of work this apart, you know, I'm going to leave that one. Look at that. That is a nice growth there. I'm going to leave that. You notice that the roots are black on here. That is the way they are. So if you've got plants and you're going, oh my gosh, I've got black roots, that's what they are. They're not dead. So I'm going to take some of my wet sphagnum moss, a little bit here and a little bit there, and I'm going to wrap. Why am I wrapping? Well, it does a couple of things. It protects the roots. Those roots, those black roots, are rather fine. They're not strong roots. So I'm going to, and some of this, what you see in here is from the sphagnum moss. That's not the roots. But now that I've got this nice little clump in here, I have protected the rhizome and the roots. And now I can dig a little hole If I move the camera, you can see the little hole. Hello there. I'm going to dig a hole here, and that is, well, 2 inches, inch and a half. I'm going to take my glob of roots and sphagnum moss and plant and kind of work it down into there. Now, the rhizome is about here, and that's about where I want my soil. So I'm going to push this back in there. As long as that sphagnum moss is there, that's going to act as a growing media for it. The peat perlite also will work. Some people plant only in sphagnum moss, some people plant only in peat. I do kind of a whatever works at the time. So as you can see, I've got 4 in here, 5 in here now, and I have a few more to do in here, and then I'll have this all planted. Well, there it is. It is now have repotted, cleaned up the dead, added in some new peat, some perlite and turfus. Turfus is acting like sand, and that helps to loosen up the media, making this a lot more root friendly. Also, the water will go through there a little easier. Won't be as boggy of a bog, if we want to say that. But I've got my SARS, my Scarlet Bell, my Minor, Purpurea, and I've got a good batch of fly traps and dirt. And I think that as the season goes along, this is going to look pretty good. It's going to display well. This does travel to events where we show how our plants are, the types of carnivorous plants that are around, and so this is usually a pretty big hit, and getting it cleaned up like this makes me feel better. I've got a couple of flower spikes coming up here. I think that my minors are going to look good this year. The Scarlet Bell, just a low-hanging plant that I think will do all right. Fly traps should do really well. So, if you have a bog, I hope that you can gain a little bit from my experience, and I hope that you do well. And keep loving your plants that eat bugs. Thank you for watching.